Hello. Today we are speaking about a frequent topic of conversation on the podcast, my future wife, Sydney, a rock star in her own right. We will discuss her experiences with managing autoimmune conditions, among other topics. All that and more on this week's episode of My Allergist Dad.
Throat tickle or itchy eye, skin rash or a patch of hives. If allergies got you down bad, then just ask my allergist dad.
Welcome to My Allergist Dad. I'm Drew, and I'm here with my dad, perennial top doc for allergy and immunology in Rhode Island, Dr. Z. Hey, Dad.
Hey, Drew.
We have an incredible guest today. She's an amazing cook, a rock star in the tech world, a coffee aficionado, and most importantly, my favorite person in the world. Sorry, Dad. My fiancée, Sydney. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And she's joining from our screen, so if those watching saw a really cool entrance.
I liked it.
We talk a lot about Sydney on the show. A lot of times I'll make the joke about how Sydney and I are sort of a nightmare for dinner parties or restaurants because we have so many dietary restrictions combined together. But also talking about how great she is and how sweet she is on the show. But we were brainstorming different topics to talk about on the show, and our producer and our social media consultant had mentioned that a good topic would be autoimmune conditions. And not that long before that, Sydney had also expressed an interest in coming on the show. And so it's kind of perfectly combined to mesh those two ideas because, Sydney has, well, I'll let her speak to it, but has some autoimmune conditions. And so kind of talking about that, the overlap with allergies, the immune system, immunology, and just, personal experience. Do you want to talk more?
Sure. I'm very excited to be on the podcast. I'm not partial, but it's one of my favorites. So
One of?
my favorite. Excited to be a featured guest. I have 2 autoimmune diseases. I am type 1 diabetic, and I also have Hashimoto's. So have lived with 2 autoimmune diseases since one autoimmune disease since I was 5 and 2 since I was 12 or 13 years old. So it's been about 20 years now.
Don't do the math. Dad, have you experienced much, have you seen a lot of overlap with your patients in either diabetes or Hashimoto's or any other, or rheumatoid arthritis?
What Sydney said, and people might disagree with me, I think the biggest problem, or I don't like the word problem, it confuses people when they separate out things. And this is something that I felt about my own asthma. People look at asthma as a disease, and then they separate out parts of asthma as separate when everything's a continuum. And when we had Dr. Tano on the show, he speaks about how you start having problems with immune complexes as part of the inflammatory situation, and then it creates the process or the condition that is the primary process that affects someone. And what I'm saying is that, and maybe in the future people will look at it differently, because for some what autoimmune quote diseases, and I'm not good at doing the finger thing.
And you can't wink either.
No, I can't wink and I can't do that. I can't make the little quotation things. What you'll find is that a lot of times they'll say, well, if you don't have this process, you need 3 of these things and 2 of these to make it that disease or that condition. And that's because it's an immune complex, immune factor causing inflammation in the body and creating in different ways. And what I learned about type 1 diabetes, and honestly, Sydney, you probably know more than me, is that it must be that you get, everything's like a genetic predisposition, and then you get a virus that kind of like does the key. And you attack.
What do you mean virus does the key?
It's the virus is what turns it on to happen or allows it to happen.
So it's epigenetic?
Yes, because not everybody who has the gene gets it needs like two processes. Someone's predisposed, and then something else happens to make the process finally occur. And so you attack the insulin producing cells in the pancreas, and now you have to provide it because you don't make any. And Hashimoto's is you're attacking the thyroid cells. So to me, you have a predisposition to autoimmune. I'm not totally sure. I think also you see Hashimoto's more in females than men, but I'm seeing some men that have it. And so there are a lot of different conditions that happen. And I think that one of the things that's amazing about Sydney, and I think that it is an important part of the podcast, is more and more. And when I watched Wimbledon and the guy took out his syringe to treat his type 2 diabetes and almost won, but it was just
He had
the other
type
guy, but
2
he's
or type 1?
type 1. And the guy who was an incredible athletic specimen, I never pronounce his
Just like
name.
Sydney.
Yes. But the point is that you can live a fully productive life and do everything as long as you take care of yourself and follow the rules. I mean, it's the same with my asthma that I got it into, I was able to get myself to be able to do everything. When I was a kid, I couldn't breathe. And I think that that's what's amazing about you, Sydney, is you do all the things you do and you do what you can to make those things in check and then continue on. And I think that that's a really important process that we need to discuss in the podcast and share with everybody is that, and you probably understand this as well as me. When I was a kid into my 20s, I didn't even speak about my asthma because I was a little self-conscious because they used to take, even in third grade, they would tape us and things. And in the background of kids reading, because you had like sections, like one group was reading, the other had to do this. And then always in the back was my coughing and wheezing. I was like the background noise of the class. And I used to say that, and really, I felt my asthma controlled me. It controlled my life. Everything about me was controlled by my asthma. And then I finally, through education and desensitization, was able to take control of it myself. And I share this with my patients all the time. And I say, once you take control of this, instead of letting it control you, you're in a different playing field. And I think that you understand what I'm speaking about, don't you? And like you went to camp for kids with diabetes, the whole idea is that the more you take care of it, the more that you're in control, but you have to do it. It's with you all the time, that your life takes a different direction. Am I saying the right thing?
Yeah, I thought you said it really well and very eloquently, and I couldn't agree more. I think my perspective in the way that I was raised, and I think it was my mom's attitude, which just rubbed off on me, was these are the cards you've been dealt. Play them the best you can, and you can do whatever you want to do in your life. You just need to make sure that you take all the extra steps. And I think ahead too much anymore, which is fortunate because of technology. But growing up, I would always have a plan A, B, and C. Whenever I left my house, I had to have my glucometer, test strips, supplies in case my blood sugar got low, supplies in case I went into a hypoglycemia, insulin, syringes, backup insulin pump supplies. Like I would leave my house with a mini backpack essentially.
Or to quote Succession, a capacious bag.
But it is so much better than when I was in med school. When I was in med school, we used to do finger pricks on patients all the time. And they had the all-day insulin, the short-term insulin, and someone into diabetic ketoacidosis. And it was very different. And I remember my father-in-law, who was a type 2, but he required insulin. Here's an older man in his late 80s putting a pump on his arm. And it was just it was incredible that he used to go to this thing here and see his sugar and the pump would just keep going, and that it was all on slightly autopilot for him. I mean, the long-term effects of doing this were very different for him. He just had to but he was so much healthier once his sugars got under control. And but and insulin plays such a role with everything, and I even the mast cells and allergy. But anyway, you were saying, Sydney.
Well, just to your point, I mean, I would say over the last 8 years, the technology has gotten significantly better. CGMs have been around for a lot longer than that. I would say
Continuous glucose
continuous,
monitors.
glucose monitors, yes.
For our audience.
That's also a very popular thing that non-diabetics are starting to do because they try to track their
Blood sugar,
and stuff.
yeah.
I was listening to someone speak about it, and that's not the topic today, but it is interesting. And sometimes I think that how much information I mean, it's different for you, but how much information do people need? And I think that, and this is my own opinion because I heard someone speak about that, Drew, so I thought that was interesting, is that I truly feel that and the whole idea is with treat the cause, defeat the symptom, is if someone's lifestyle, and our guest before speaking about a little stress is okay, that I think that I don't want information all the time. And some people want constant information. But it's like if you change the oil, you do this, you follow the maintenance, you do everything, your car should run really well if you start from the beginning.
Right.
And if you're following the basics of spirituality, sleep, eating healthy, making sure you do all the key steps, then everything should fall into place that we don't have to constantly obsess over every little thing.
Yeah, because I'm kind of ambivalent about, I'd say, non-diabetics using a CGM, and I don't know the whole macroeconomic effects, the whole psychological effects. On the one hand, I'm someone who wears a step watch everywhere, like a GPS watch, and I really like it, and it helps me see how many steps have I taken, how can I increase it. And I do think that's where observation allows for an improved lifestyle. I think that's good. But I also think about CGM. So maybe there's a certain amount where if people are watching their glucose at all times, maybe that observation helps them keep it in check in a healthier way. That said, if that's affecting the supply chain for people who actually need CGMs, then I really don't think that observation is worth it when you can pretty easily track your calories to the same effect.
Yeah, but someone who's really following their CGM, that is really so attuned to everything going on, yes, there are times that when they're stressed out, they might see their sugar go up. But overall, those are the people who probably don't need the CGM.
I have some perspective here, and I agree with Drew. I feel ambivalent if people want to check their blood sugar and they're non-diabetic with a CGM. I do think that it can oftentimes affect supply chain depending upon which brands they're choosing. So their non-diabetics use a different type of CGM than type 1 and type 2 diabetics. I will say I think more information, as we all know, is power, and it can also be stressful. To your point, John, I think non-diabetics, if they are producing insulin in the way that they need to be for their body to not be pre-diabetic for type 2, or make sure that they are not type 1 diabetic, that's a different conversation. But if it's from a health perspective, it does give a lot of data points into how your body reacts to different types of food. But I also think if you are studying nutrition, you know what the effects are on your blood sugar, but it's very acute because you can see within 3 minutes, I'm eating an apple, that affects my blood sugar differently than eating a mango. But that gets very, very granular. And I don't know that everyone needs that attention to detail. I mean, I'm curious your perspective.
Drew was talking about his steps. I sometimes look at my Apple thing to say, oh, I walk 4 miles or I've done it so much. Honestly, it's not going to change how much I walk because most of the time I like to walk a whole batch and try to walk wherever I go. And the only reason I don't walk as much, I didn't have a chance to walk. But I think that, I think the whole point is your body is really a an amazing, it's like your brain. It's an amazing machine, and the design of it is fantastic. And one of the things is it's our modern lifestyle that has created some of the problems we do. And if you eat a plant-based whole food diet, your glucose is not going to go like this from your food. It's different for you because you don't have the insulin, and so you need to adapt it to your diet. And it's interesting because Dr. Tano has a, has a poster that I have in my office based on his book, where it shows hyperinsulinemia leads to mast cell hyper proliferation and more allergic reactions and hives, etc. But that's often because type 2 diabetes, stress, whatever it is, sets it off. And if that person needs to see those numbers to understand what they need to do, upstream, then that's helpful. But if you follow the rules or whatever if you really follow those recommendations, then I don't think you need to monitor your blood sugar because it will naturally follow the path it's supposed to do as long as you have a working pancreas.
It seems more like a curiosity. I guess I haven't read a lot about what tracking your blood sugar does as someone with a functioning pancreas. Like, it seems more like an interesting science experiment than like a necessary health thing. Because to your point, if you eat a lower sugar diet, your blood sugar is gonna be different.
And it's not even lower sugar. Like if we get into like sort of like another layer of that, I would be eating, different types of carbohydrates, like eating brown rice over white rice. But all of these things, I think, again, if you're in tune and up to date with like basic nutrition, most people do know it.
Yeah, it's the whole thing about glycemic index. And getting back to the Hashimoto's, it's interesting because some people in the functional world speak about how if you address more of an autoimmune diet when these things happen, it might slow it down more, or again, work on reducing inflammation in your body. That's different than the type 1 diabetes. And that the more you can work with inflammation, it may have prominent effects on that. Because I remember once I had a patient who came to me, she was pregnant and she had severe hives, really severe hives. And she had Hashimoto's, and she had a thyroid, her thyroid peroxidase was like 6,000. And the endocrinologist had said to her, don't worry about it. And it just kept going up. And then she'd burn out her thyroid. And so when she came to me and she was pregnant, she was loaded with hives, etc., I had remember learning that if you have one autoimmune, you're likely to have another. So I did a celiac screen on her, and her celiac autoantibodies were off the chart, even though she had never had any GI symptoms. And so then she went gluten-free. And once she started going gluten-free, addressing the celiac, her hives improved, and subsequently her thyroid peroxidase levels started dropping because she was up to 6,000 and she was down to maybe like 200. And so and that's what I'm saying is with some of these secondary autoimmune issues, and Dr. Tano, I think more appropriate, likes to call them immune complexes. In his feeling, it's not where there are definitely some autoimmune. So, for example, the idea of celiac is it's attacking the villi cells, that he feels that the more you can reduce the inflammatory response ongoing, things will start calming down. Doesn't mean they're going to totally go away, but, and like Terry Walls, it's all about focusing on reducing inflammation, inflammatory processes, lifestyle, etc., and these things get more into balance.
Right. And it's interesting you bring up celiac disease. I know that celiac disease and Hashimoto's are the most common secondary autoimmune diseases for type 1 diabetics. I myself am not celiac, knock on wood, but I do follow a primarily gluten-free diet. I was mostly gluten-free, just coincidentally a lot of vegan products, and I have been vegan at different points in my life. But now, like, living with Drew, we eat entirely gluten-free at home.
And it's, oh, we have a guest. It's all about reducing inflammation.
But yeah, Sydney has talked about how I mean, not that she's ever eaten all that much gluten, but how she's started to try to, I think per your recommendation,
Yeah.
eat less gluten and see what that does to help reduce certain inflammation. And I think I'll let her refute or support, but she's felt better.
I just listened to she gave one of the lectures in my nutrition class.
There's a book, I think I listened to her book on Audible.
I started listening to her book per your recommendation.
It's in our group.
Yeah.
And her story is compelling, how she was able to change the inflammatory response associated with her MS. And how what's interesting is that she works at the VA, she gets 20 minutes with them, and she just promotes a certain diet and lifestyle. And most of it is like 6 servings of vegetables and certain more of an autoimmune anti-inflammatory diet. And how people who were inflamed, the way you eat is different, though you do have a sweet tooth, so do I, and so does Drew. And but it's moving away from those and the sugar and it's really changed things. And I think that it's part about what we speak to in the podcast and it goes to one step that I'm a true believer in. And I think that one of the nice things about what Dr. Wall speaks about, what you speak about, what I speak about is it's all about control. Because by doing these things, you start having control over your destiny instead of feeling you're a victim of the disease.
Absolutely.
And obviously, there are people and their diseases and their terrible things that you can't control. And we're not speaking about that, but we're speaking about chronic problems that are going to be with you, that your actions can help direct the outcome.
Absolutely.
And I think one thing that we just touched on earlier and we've talked on other episodes, the technology for a lot of these autoimmune conditions and the treatment is so much better than it used to be. Dad, you mentioned how much better psoriasis treatment is and how much harder it used to be to have psoriasis. We're talking about the improvements in CGMs and insulin pumps that make being a diabetic a lot easier to manage. And even to a certain degree, and in a similar way, there's so much, at the very least, tasty, if not also healthier food out there for different. If you're gluten free, if you can't have peanuts, if you can't have dairy, the amount of dietary restriction accommodating food out there that is really tastes good is so much better than I'd imagine it used to be.
The difference is, one of the things is you mature instead of age. As you mature, as you get to see things and look back. And sometimes it just marvels me. And when I was really little and had bad asthma attacks, they'd just come out with inhalers. And the first ones, what happened is if you overuse a bronchodilator, you lose receptors just like the nasal decongestants, and you get rebound congestion. So I'm a 5-year-old. They came out with this thing called a Duo Medihaler, gave me immediate relief with my asthma. But every time you used it, and they hadn't learned about anti-inflammatory meds, you just got prednisone when you're bad. I would end up in the late 80s, in 1990, I remember in early 90s, they said how albuterol kills. It wasn't albuterol that kills, is that you used it so much, if you didn't treat the inflammation, the airway shrunk and you kept using it. And then you were using it too much. Well, the Duo Medihaler was worse. It was like Afrin. And at 5 years old, I was addicted to it because I had an asthma attack. I kept using it, and then it made me have asthma attacks. They took it away. So when I was a kid, the way they treated, they give me a Sudafed pill. It's just a decongestant, wasn't doing anything for my asthma. And every time I had a severe asthma attack, I had to go to the doctor and gave me an epinephrine injection. People talk about epi. I would constantly get shots. And it's like, whoa, you're like this. And they give me all these steroids.
And your grandfather would give you some brandy.
Yeah, that actually was the smartest thing to relax me. But that was my life. And when they started getting inhalers, they could treat the inflammation. And even though we had to get out of Canada and then going to an area that was drier, it was life-changing. And it's like and then to start having all these other easier treatments of asthma and inhaled steroids I used to take this thing and it was 4 times a day. I take this capsule and I breathe in the plastic. And then the other inhalers, and I was telling someone yesterday about how when I was in residency, when I was an intern and HIV was new, the people used to take the meds that didn't work as well 5 times a day. And now it's not only prophylactic, but for those that unfortunately still have it, it's once a day. And then keeps them their levels so low that they can lead a normal life. And we had opened a bone marrow transplant unit at GW where I did my internship residency. And I remember it was a big deal, bone marrow transplants. And I remember MRIs were a big deal, that they were limiting how many they had. But our bone marrow transplant unit was limited to people 30, if you were 30 and under or under 30. So anyone over 30 would not get a bone marrow transplant, which today people are shocked to hear because a 95-year-old can get it. But in those days, if someone was 30, no, you're not going to get it. It's like when your grandfather said dialysis first came out and no one over 65 could get it. So and then we spoke about in the last podcast about how I always say we're a product of our success, because when these things we've done so well with them technologically, we forget they were ever an issue. And because we forget they're an issue, we're like, why do we need these things? Why do we need to prevent things? Why do we need to do any of this? No one has that problem, but they don't have that problem because of what we're doing and treating, you know what I mean? And preventing and working to keep people from being sick. And I think that sometimes you just step back and I'm like, oh my, it's so incredible how far we've gone. And for you to say, oh, I have this continuous monitor and it makes sure my insulin's good and I have a pump and, and I can do this. I'm flying to Europe. I'm flying to this place. I'm flying to that. And, 35 years ago, you didn't have any of that, and and 30 and 50 years before that, they didn't even have insulin or whatever. And the fact that mom loves when calls the heart, and they were flying in insulin so this little boy wouldn't die in the early 1920s. And it's just incredible how much technology and biotech. And we were talking about Liz O'Day when she came up with the metabolomics, and that she can actually predict who's going to respond to treatment and keep people from rejecting a transplant and not getting so sick and dying from an infection with this urine test she developed. It's incredible. It's exciting.
I keep sending her my urine and she's not responding.
God forbid you should need her to look at your urine.
I send my urine all around. I always, whoever can do something with it, I want it to go to waste.
Check it out.
What can you do with this?
This is a joke. My ex-brother-in-law, Eric's father, used to tell jokes about urine, but I can't say it on the podcast.
Well, Baba used to tell a joke about like being I'm trying to remember what it was.
Well, diabetic urine in the old days was sweet because of the excess sugar.
Yeah,
Bob always said that urine was sterile, but but they would always say that urine was sweet.
Who figured that out? What was the test?
What
was the first doctor
are
to
you
say, hey,
okay?
this is
Oh,
pretty sweet?
that doesn't taste good.
Type 2.
That tastes good. Oh, I
You
like
know
it.
what? I'm getting hints of type 1. It's got some nice legs on it. This is a Serbian varietal.
Sydney, what was the most important thing you learned when you went to camp and that helped you take care of yourself when you were a child?
I mean, I didn't really learn, I would say, best diabetic, like medical practices at camp because I would say arguably like my blood sugar control was worse at camp than it was at home because type 1 diabetes in so many ways is so personal. And imagine like a lot of autoimmune diseases, you can look at care on a pamphlet, you can hear it from your doctor, but until you're living with the disease and understand how your sort of like own little nuances of it work, I think it's difficult. So they would take like a blanket approach with everyone. So I would say camp was more of like an emotional and supportive community, which was great. And I definitely needed as a kid. I didn't grow up with any type 1 diabetics. I didn't know any at my school until I was in middle school. But I would say my best takeaways from type 1 diabetes care were through my endocrinologist. I went to Madison Clinic at UCSF growing up with like the leading, specifically, pediatric endocrinologists focused on type 1 diabetes research. They've done most of the stem cell and like cure for diabetes research, which has been interesting. But my biggest takeaways growing up were be prepared. We don't need to be scared of, we want to be cautious, of course, and mindful of low blood sugars. But I think a lot of people run their children's blood sugar on the higher side because they had fear of them going low. And now there's a lot of guardrails around that with the insulin pump, having the CGM, and constantly knowing what your blood sugar is. I would used to only know my blood sugar when I would check it, which would be every 2 to 3 hours. My mom would wake up in the middle of the night. And then I would say the biggest unlock.
So, like, you'd have to get it checked in the middle of the night.
Yeah. Yeah, every 2 hours, 3 hours. But I would say my biggest like care evolution was when I was in my early 20s. I read a book by a man who's type 1 diabetic. And I think the book is called Land. I'll get the name of the book, but it was a great book, and he talked about nutrition. And I think a big thing that is sensitive is you don't want to tell children they can't eat this, they can't eat that. The reality is you can't eat everything because you can give yourself insulin. However, our bodies do not react in the same way. So I stay away always from white rice. I stay away
Except for sushi.
except for sushi sometimes, but like that will spike me. Grapes, even when I give myself a pre-insulin injection, so that will be 20 minutes before I have a meal, giving myself insulin to prepare for what's coming, because the insulin doesn't act immediately like a regular, pancreas would do, or a pancreas that is non-diabetic, I should say. But nutrition has been my biggest takeaway. And I also think walks, like we walk every night after dinner we try to go for like an hour or at least 45 minutes. And I would say walking is a huge thing.
Drew can thank me for that.
I wasn't easy at first, but I grew to love it.
He grew to love walking. Yeah, I had the kids walk all the time. It's interesting because you said a couple of things that parallels with every other condition we speak about. It has to come from within. It has to come
Absolutely.
from within you. Everybody can give you the information. And I say it all the time with patients. You can give them everything, but unless they are ready and have that inner drive to take it from there, it's not going to happen. And you're also like a Ferrari, and not, where you can't just put any oil, gas, etc. You have to have exactly, these engines always require just the right everything to tune well.
And I also will add, and I'm curious your perspective about this, is I was diagnosed with type 1 at 5 years old. Before that, as a baby, I was allergic to my baby formula that had dairy in it. So I've, you know, consistently not been having dairy since I was 18 years old, but I was always lactose intolerant from, I guess, like a couple months old. And I always have thought that it's interesting the tie of like food sensitivities and type 1 diabetes. I don't know. I would imagine they're related. That's never been confirmed when I have conversations.
Well, there may be something if you think about it. If you go to the functional world, it's all about the microbiome and the your gut lining and integration. And if you think about what, in my opinion, the way lactose intolerance is a problem with a sugar in milk. It's not an allergy. It's not immune mediated sensitivity. It's you don't have enough of an enzyme in your gut lining to break down the sugar lactose in the milk. And so if your gut lining isn't as healthy, now if you think about it, diabetics, we talk about the sweet urine, and you were diagnosed when you were 5, didn't mean something wasn't leading up to it. And they talk about candida overgrowth and everything else. And when, like for me as a kid, and I was a sugaraholic and candy, I was on so much steroids and antibiotics. My gut, the whole thing was overgrowth, whatever. And the whole lining was a mess. And then, as Drew was saying, things are so much easier. They had me on such restricted diets, and the foods were awful. Like soy stuff and everything was so terrible when I was a kid. It was like water awful. I couldn't put enough sugar. They wouldn't let me have chocolate, enough coffee syrup that it was disgusting. And so I think that part of it is your gut border, your protective layer, just like with me, the mucosal lining was not healthy. And we probably had leaky gut, tight junction issues, etc., which lead to food sensitivity. Because the whole theory is that the food proteins leak through the tight junction. It releases zonulin that hold the cells together, and it leaks through it and introduces to your immune cell, and that leads to the food inflammatory response. And I'm sure you had it. I had it. The eggs and stuff. And it's all part of it because it's all part of the microbiome, the Treg cells. Many people have a lot of stuff going on, they're all lactose intolerant because their gut lining isn't great. So you don't have it. And lactose intolerance is really, it's not black and white. It's not either have it or don't. It's a relative. For some people, they can have a little, but if they overwhelm themselves with milk, then they used up their stores, where some people a lot more stores than others. And that's the way I look at it.
One story I think you'll appreciate, and Sydney can kind of correct me on parts of it, but I don't remember where you were in line, but there was someone who saw Sydney at a CGM and he's like, "Oh, are you diabetic?" She's like, "Yeah." He's like, "I'm diabetic too. What's your A1C?" So he asked sort of like what, and Sydney has a good one. He asked because he had an even better one because he wanted to brag about it. He's like, "You want to know my secret?" And she said, "What?" He goes, "I do intermittent fasting."
I like saying digestive rest. I'm doing that lately, and I like that one. And it really does heal the gut. And I've just been doing it the last 2 months, to be honest, because it was terrible. And even yesterday, I'm getting better at it. Where I was somewhere they really didn't have much to eat, and I was a little hungry, and I was like, "Oh, I'll have something." Nope. And I really am working toward 12 to 13 hours. And I really feel it's done such a different it's so simple. Because I don't like the word intermittent fasting because it's like you sound like you're fasting. You're not fasting, but I like that I'm giving my digestion a rest.
Because to you, a fast is religious.
Yeah, it's overnight. It's not even like it's what normal. I mean, my poor dog Dolly, she talk about if you talk about intermittent fasting, she gets 2 meals a day in the morning and then 3:30, sometimes as late as 5, and she doesn't eat again, until like 15 hours later. Talk about a healthy gut.
She's 9 pounds, so she doesn't need much food, and I'm sure she finds a lot of scraps.
I know, but she still has to rest that poor gut, tiny little food, tiny little everything. She's getting her probiotic. Oh my God, is that making a difference? You speak about dog health. It's already quite a difference, her little probiotic. It's turkey flavor. She seems to like it a lot.
I also need a refill of my pure encapsulation probiotic, please.
I don't even take it. I have a better probiotic. Shh. We
Okay.
had the guest on the show. I have a better one for you, Sydney, that actually I think is better for you because he was our guest, Mark Charbonneau. He has a probiotic and
Celiac.
it's
He'll remember
yes,
that
and
one.
the reason he has shown how they're not all the same, and his interacts. Not only does it improve inflammation, but he did a study that showed that it slows bone loss. And what he emphasized, and the reason I think you, Sydney, would be really good for it, I'll give you some when I see you, is that he studied women in their 50s and it showed that their osteopenia slowed down, et cetera, et cetera. But he emphasized that if you start in your 30s, you know what I mean? It'll slow down you getting to that point. And he is coming out with another study in a slate, and it also has autoimmune benefits. And he shows that not all probiotics and how they interact, et cetera. And it's compelling because he has a double-blind, placebo-controlled study that shows it works. And he's one of our podcasts, and we had a great time with him. And I think that that's the one I'm really excited about now. Not that the other one's bad, but I'm always learning and reassessing, and his results were compelling. And to me, and I even said to him, "Well, what if you started it, a couple decades earlier? Like my kids, they should really start it." And it meant too. And he said, definitely. He said, that's really the way to do it. And you might even find with some of your other stuff a big change. I mean, I can't believe how Dolly, the dog, is already different. Maggie, it was the same thing, but Maggie was the diet, and then I added a probiotic. But this one with our dog Dolly, and we did have, remember, we had um the vet and we spoke about pet allergies, but Dolly's, you can say it, pooping more, and the poops are different. Like they have this whole they actually have a diagram of what's a good looking poop and not. Yeah, there's a whole poop scale. Well, anyway, her poop scale is really up there. And I mean, this dog, she went once a day. She's up to 3 times a day. She does these walks. She's like, wow. She says, I think I'm like a German Shepherd the way she's pooping. She's like really up there and very proud of her poops. And then she has it and then she's skipping home.
She could be the next Jamie Lee Curtis for Activia. I think that's as good a time as any. The end of the food cycle, the end of the podcast, to start to wrap things up. Thank you, Sydney, for being on the show. You've been a
Thanks for having
lovely
me.
guest. And thank you, listeners, for listening in. Hopefully, you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did and that you're enjoying these episodes. Please subscribe so you don't miss new ones. We have some really great ones coming out. It helps people find the show, which we really appreciate. Follow the link in our description. Send us your questions. Email us at myallergistdad@gmail.com and we'll answer them on the show. Before we go, Dad, Sydney, any final thoughts?
I just want to emphasize that as you see the direction and some of our topics, I'm board certified in allergy and clinical immunology, and more clinical immunology and allergy is just part of is the immune system and how much everything's interreactive. And so many of my patients who come with worsening allergies, their other immune conditions, autoimmune, have been out of whack. And as their autoimmune issues, their psoriasis, everything improve, their allergies improve. And that's why we're moving out because immunology, as clinical immunology, is expanding so much with our understanding, our discussions, and everything's connected.
Well, thank you both and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
This is fun.
If allergies got you down bad, then just ask my allergist. My allergist dad.
The My Allergist Dad podcast is for general informational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice, and no doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from this podcast is at the user's own risk. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice for any medical condition they may have and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions.